Well, as we're continuing on our journey of Roman history, we now come to the Achaean War. To really talk about the Achaean War, you need to at least have a basic understanding of the Macedonian War. So, just in general, very brief overview, there was a multitude of wars, revolts, and so on from the Macedonian and northern Greek city states against Rome over a period of give or take 50 years. At this time, the Achaean League and the Lacedaemonians, or what we would call the Spartans, teamed up with Rome. And this allowed Rome a pretty easy victory. And so at the end of the day, it was a Roman victory, obviously with the support of the Spartans and the Achaean League. At this time, the Achaean League was sort of the superpower of the Greek states. As you can kind of understand, the Achaean League was a collection of city-states that were allied together, that were very close-knit. They would have a central commander. Not that this was completely foreign to previous Greek leagues and such, but, I'm just saying at the time this was pretty much the biggest Greek superpower, so having them as an ally was good. And obviously the Spartans, another big ally to have. So the Romans pretty easily put down the revolts and win these wars. That's going to, there's a lot to get into that. There's a lot to get in there and unpack. And perhaps I'll cover those individual wars, or maybe I'll do it as one whole thing. But right now, we're just going to talk about the Achaean War. And to do that, you need to at least understand that they were, previous to this, allies. That's kind of the jumping off point for the Achaean War, because the Achaean League basically is having a bunch of territorial disputes, and they want more and more of the land of the city-states that they beat. And they're also having a few territorial disputes with Sparta. So all of this, they kind of have to await Roman ruling, because now Rome is the dominant force in the province. So, they're waiting to hear what the Romans will say. And I'm sure that at the time, a lot of those leaders kind of assumed that they would just get the territory that they wanted. But Rome, having considered the proposals, ruled against them. And they said that Spartans should be given their territory. Those that were defeated should keep their territory that the Achaean League sought. And so a lot of the officials and a lot of the public were kind of disgruntled with Rome, that they wouldn't side with them in these territorial disputes. And again, so who is in the wrong there? This is and the sources are going to be very critical of the Greeks. And perhaps that's true. The reality is that these guys sided with Rome to defeat other Greeks, essentially, and then tried to use that to expand their territory and influence. And I think it's not exactly good behavior. And just Rome, just trying to be fair to its subjects and allies, try to rule in favor of what they believed was best for everyone. And obviously, they didn't like that. So, should you potentially have been rewarded with new territories for helping Rome? Maybe, but I don't think, if Rome turns you down, I don't think there's an argument to be had against them. They're just telling you, hey, let these people have their lands. Let's not shake up the borders too much. Let's keep the status quo. And the reality is that the Achaean League is still the dominant power in Greece. So perhaps if they waited and kind of let a little time go by, maybe there's a case to be had where they kind of reclaim power. Or, you don't really know. Those city-states could have willingly joined your cause, and you could have tried to get a more united Greece. But it just everything was kind of moving too fast, and this obviously led Rome kind of seeing this expansionistic ambitions. They wanted to squash that. And Rome, they obviously heard about this. They heard about the disputes. They heard about the disputes with Sparta. So they sent some delegates over. I said, hey, listen, we just want to meet with you. We want to talk to your officials, and we want to kind of square this away. And so when they got there, I believe it was either Deus or we'll say Dias. We'll go with the English pronunciation just for my ease of pronunciation. And Critolus are the two leaders or the two people that are elected strategos of the Achaean League. Dias was already the strategos before Critolus. He actually ends up taking over, and then later on, Dias will return to power. And on the Roman side, the people we're going to be looking at is Metellus and Lucius Mummius, who, if you watch the Lusitanian War video, you will already have a little understanding of Lucius Mummius, and you would know kind of what's going to happen here. But Critolus is responsible for drumming up all this support or this anti-Roman sentiment. And so he kind of maneuvers it in a way that whenever the delegates come to meet, he sends out all of his officials and delegates to different city-states and says, oh, they're very busy. What the Romans probably knew, or maybe didn't, was that while they were out in these different city-states, they were drumming up Roman hostilities. They kept preaching how Rome was stopping them from their greatness, how Rome had betrayed them, and most importantly, a huge sentiment that was being drummed up in the Achaean League at the time, in these collection of city-states, was Rome did not want to fight the Achaean League. They were afraid of them. They already knew, obviously you have the Lusitanian War, they knew that the Romans were fighting a multitude of the wars, and they kind of falsely believed that Rome would have no interest in trying to stop the Achaean League from expanding in Greece. Eventually, the delegates do get their meeting, and they just basically say, hey, just stop your hostilities to Rome. We are considering these territories that you're after as Roman territories now. So if you're trying to take these territories, or the Spartans, who are our allies, just like you are, it's just not going to work. We are protecting these people, and the Spartans are our allies, and you're allies. We just want everyone to get along now. Okay, the war's done. You guys are the dominant power in Greece. Let's all just get along. And the Greeks respond to this by basically bludgeoning and attacking and viciously mutilating the delegates that were sent there. So naturally, Rome not too happy about that, and they dispatched Metellus to basically take Corinth. Obviously, he's going to carve his way through there. So Critolus becomes elected strategos, kind of giving himself almost despotic power here. A lot of the Greek sources at the time are incredibly critical of Critolus, but are very critical of him. They dislike him a lot. And again, it's one of those cases. Is it one of those cases where we're looking at it after the fact? So if he won the war, he'd be a hero and lauded as a genius. But he lost the war, so he's a loser. I think. I will say, I kind of think regardless that Critolus would be very disliked, even if he somehow miraculously won. Obviously, a miraculous victory in the right place changes anyone's trajectory. But Critolus kind of just seemed incompetent based on the sources. Again, a lot of these sources are writing after the fact, and a lot of these sources saw the pain that befell Greece. I mean, most of these sources literally call this war the calamity. So, I mean, they don't exactly love this war in the first place. And they're incredibly critical of the decision to do it. So Critolus attacks the delegates, and Rome dispatches Metellus. When Rome dispatches Metellus, he is completely of the mind to secure peace. So once again, they reach out to them, and they basically say, we want peace. We don't want a war with you guys. Let's cease all hostilities to Rome. And Critolus responds by having the people vote to declare war against Sparta, which again is a Roman ally, so effectively you're declaring war against Rome. So Critolus leads his men to stop Metellus. He knows this is the big threat. Other city-states like Thebes have allied with the Achaean League in the war against Sparta, hoping to get more territory from a victory. Upon the Thebans and upon other city-states hearing that Metellus was coming to deal with them, they urged Critolus, please ask for peace. Critolus refused, marched his men to Thermopylae, and were promptly wiped out. They said that even though they were at the historic ground where the Spartans defended, none of that made the Achaeans feel any better about their chances against Metellus, and they were easily routed and defeated. Critolus, again, likely perishing in that battle. So as Metellus continues to march on, and, he eventually comes to Thebes, the people were so afraid of Metellus that they abandoned the city. Metellus tried his best not to allow more slaves be taken and innocent civilians be killed, tried not to destroy too many things in Thebes, and after this, a few other city-states surrendered over to Metellus. So seeing his success with really only having won one battle, he decides, hey, let's try and end this thing again. At this point, Dias had taken over. He had already been Strategos before. Maybe he thought, this guy's a little bit more rational. So he asks him, he says, hey, what do you think? Can we end this whole thing, cease Roman hostility, and become friends again? Critolus is dead. We can kind of blame him for this. Well, Dias, he says, yeah, I'm not going to do that. That's not going to happen. We're going to kill you. And he releases a bunch of slaves on the condition that they fight in the army. And if they survive and win, they can have their freedom. This has been a tradition at other times in times of peril for Greece. But either way, he tried that. And yeah, he was going to continue this war. Metellus is becoming increasingly nervous now because he really wants to wrap this war up. Because at this point, Lucius or Lucius Mummius, but I'm going to say Lucius, has been dispatched from Rome. And he knows that if he doesn't wrap this whole thing up, the credit's going to go to Lucius Mummius. So he is trying desperately to finish this war. You can look at Metellus as this virtuous figure because he doesn't really kill and enslave people. He only really fights one major battle. Most of the cities surrender to him. He constantly tries to ask for peace. But I think, and I'm not saying that those things are not virtuous, and I think he did do a lot of virtuous deeds, or it was to the end of him getting more political support for himself or more glory for himself. And not that that's necessarily makes you evil or bad. It's just that he did have an ulterior motive for trying to get peace so many times. Lucius Mummius, our good friend from Lusitania, has arrived in Greece. He quickly takes Corinth. He sieges Corinth and takes it. This pretty much ends the war. Dias flees to Megalopolis, and while there, he kills his wife and drinks poison to avoid his capture and imprisonment. That is the end of the Achaean War. It's a very easy victory for Rome, and most of the sources kind of point out that even most people knew that this was a war that they would lose. They knew they pretty much had no chance against Rome. They had just fought a war alongside them. They saw how strong and how good they were. And yet these leaders still deceived these people into believing that Rome wouldn't even try to fight them. They were afraid. They have too many other things going on. They don't want a war with us. And the reality is, they just were not powerful enough to fight Rome. Dias and Critolus receive a lot of disdain from the Greeks at the time. And I think kind of one quote sums it up very well. For a king or state to undertake a war and be unlucky is due to the jealousy of some divinity rather than to the fault of the combatants. But audacity, combined with weakness, should be called madness rather than ill luck. And I think that perfectly encapsulates the sentiment of these authors at the time. They didn't view these men as unlucky. They didn't view them as a war that they could win and the Romans just were better that day. They viewed this as an insane attack on the greatest superpower of the time, one that most of these authors would have been friendly with and received well from. And they already know that this nation is stronger than them. They know this. They've seen what they've done to other Greek city-states, and you can say with their help, but they know that they are the better army. There's no question. And they still tried this. And I think, realistically, these generals genuinely believed when they said Rome's not going to go to war with us. That was, I think, the central tipping point for these men. They just believed, they're not even going to bother with us. They're going to let us take the territory here and there, and that's fine, because we're their friends. They did not expect Rome to defend the interest of conquered people or their other allies in the Spartans. They didn't expect them to back them up, and they did. This is a super interesting war, because it's kind of just two allies going against each other, and most of the sources are going to critique this war as or the influence of bad leadership and kind of the woes of electing these power-hungry men. And I agree with that in some sense. You definitely see that. But Critolus and Dias are clearly not good leaders. Most of the Greek authors are going to call this a calamity because a lot of the Greeks in these states, were there's multiple accounts of people hurting themselves, releasing their property, doing bodily harm to themselves. It's a very interesting time. So when Lucius Mummius wins and sieges Corinth, he's pretty good about saving artifacts and saving important things. And some sources, like, you can kind of, if you know which pro-Roman source I'm talking about, kind of very, very pro-Roman guy, he kind of just says, actually verbatim, that Lucius Mummius did not take a single plunder into his own house. And maybe that's true, but other sources kind of debate that he split it up between him and a few other people. So perhaps he took it for himself and then distributed it later, but certainly a few sources mention him taking artifacts, which again is kind of, when they mention it, they're mentioning it in the interest of him saving these artifacts from Corinth. So, who's to say? But Lucius Mummius, again, comes in, sieges Corinth, wins this war very easily, and is given a lot of credit and a lot of praise for this. And I don't think you can discount the impact of Metellus. I mean, a lot of people already wanted to stop the war when they heard that Metellus was dispatched. They urged the Achaeans to stop. The Critolus said, please, rescind this. Let's ask for peace. Because, again, most of these states kind of just believed, hey, we're going to be fighting our previous enemies and the Spartans, and together we can beat those guys. But as soon as the Romans were actually going to fight, most of the fight was already lost from these people. So you have these people kind of going on these suicide missions, knowing that they're probably going to die against the Roman armies and still trying to fight anyway. Rome constantly asking for peace, constantly being denied, constantly having to take another city and another city and another city until Mummius takes Corinth. And again, I don't believe Mummius is a bad guy, but post this war, post taking Corinth, he inflicts a lot of penalties on the Achaean League and the Greeks. And not only does he inflict these penalties of monetary punishments, tributes and such, so he inflicts these monetary punishments, as well as kind of insinuating that they have to be ruled by a Roman governor, which the big thing for the Greeks was having their own governments and autonomy, and that was going to be taken away from them. And this is why I say Rome is very much in the right in this war. And again, it's hard because if you look at the macro view, this is an expansionistic empire that just fought a war, used you guys as allies, and then when you wanted to expand, turned you down. So you can see it in from that lens, but I don't think that is a very accurate depiction because really, once they've won, they're now trying to protect the interest of them and the Spartans, who are still their allies. So it is more about the expansionistic ideals of the Achaeans than it is the Romans, at least we can say in the micro. Um, so I think they're doing kind of everything right. They're defending these people. They're 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 not only do they defend these people, they're really trying to sue for peace a lot. They don't want these to even have these battles. And after Mummius imposes these fines and penalties, they rescind most of them. So they don't have to give a lot of the money back, and they allow them a lot more autonomy, even a little bit after this happens, but it still happens. It's in the mind of the Romans to do, and they do it. So you can see there's really not a lot of ill will towards them. They just don't. They're like, well, we don't want to fight this war. You are making us. I think that gives the Romans a lot of credibility for this being a just war. And again, should Dias and Critolus have accepted peace? Absolutely. They should have known, and likely did know, that they had no chance. So it is kind of interesting that they would continue this war, allow all these cities to be sieged and taken, and for Dias to not only not surrender, but kill his wife and commit suicide. I think you can kind of see where I'm coming. Dias probably not going to be put too highly on this tier list once we get there. Before we get to the tier list, though, I do want to talk about this because this occurs at the same time as, roughly the same time, as Viriathus and the Lusitanian War. And, I mean, what a contrast. I think it's such an interesting thing, and it's very interesting that Lucius Mummius, a guy who had a lot of success in the Lusitanian War and obviously wins and finishes the Achaean War, very interesting that we get to see that from his perspective both times. And what I have to say is I know I like to kind of keep these topics separated, but this is one that I have to kind of include. And because again, the people themselves of Corinth kind of knew that this was going on, and they knew about the Third Punic War, so they kind of assumed, well, they're going to be too occupied and we're good to go. Not quite what happened. But I think it's really interesting when you compare these generals, because even if you take Punicus, the starter of the Lusitanian War, this is just a guy who was not allied with Rome, was not allied with Carthage, is watching these guys expand in Iberia, and his people are getting pushed more and more into worse and worse lands, and so he just decides, hey, like, that's it. And so they go to war, and obviously he's killed. And later, Viriathus takes power. And again, so you say, this is why, to me, head-to-head, Viriathus and Critolus and Dias, Viriathus is leagues above them. Why? And you say, well, their ends are kind of similar, but Viriathus, how did he die? He was assassinated, and he won constant battles and actually forced the Romans to give him peace and declare him a friend of Rome in the Senate. This is a guy that was revered. This is a guy that was feared. Critolus and Dias were swept under the rug before they even had a chance to put their names in the books to begin with. And my point with Viriathus is his actions were not treacherous himself. Obviously, the Lusitanians broke a treaty, and that led to this war. Arguably, and they break multiple treaties throughout, they still were watching Rome come and control their lands, and so they try to put a stop to it. The Achaeans, these aren't really their lands. I mean, it's Greece, but they helped Rome defeat these people. So you can't go, you can't do that. You're in our land. You helped. You were on their side. If you didn't want them there, you should have fought them in the first place. So I think those are very different beginnings, and on top of being very different beginnings, Rome is incredibly evil to the Lusitanians. I mean, let's not forget that Lucullus is starting the war without approval from the Senate. Galba is slaughtering innocent, defenseless people, okay? Up to 30,000 potentially innocent people slaughtered. Varatheus sees this. He's a part of it. He was there the day they were killing all the unarmed men. So he knows the treachery of Rome. That's why he's fighting this war, because he doesn't believe they can be trusted. Their backs are against the wall. They're going to accept peace, and he rallies the men because he believes if he doesn't, they're going to be killed. That's a far more noble pursuit than lying to your people about Roman hostilities and lying to your people that Rome doesn't want a war. It's far more respectful of a thing and honorable of a thing to defend. And this is why I agree with the sources that they're terrible leaders and it's their fault, I gotta be honest. Because Viriathus, for everything he witnessed, for everything he did, all of his successes in his guerrilla war, always continuously asked for peace, and eventually, in his most dominant victory over Vitellius, sues for peace and gets it. Viriathus knew, I cannot win a war with Rome. I can't. It's impossible. I need to be their friend because I'm not winning a war against this juggernaut. They have enough manpower, resources, weaponry to put me in the dirt 10 times over. So I need, when I make a big play, to become peaceful with them. And there was still other tribes he had to deal with. It's not like this was the only thing that was on his mind. He had plenty of problems in Iberia itself. Maybe he didn't think it would be a prolonged peace, but it would certainly be enough time that he could handle other issues. But he knew. This is a guy who knew. We know that he did not really want this prolonged war with Rome because he knew he couldn't win. Critulus and Dias, Rome is afraid of them, which is a complete ridiculous thing to even say. And then they believe it and send these people to their deaths, including themselves. It's insane. You're trying to fight a war against Rome. You know you cannot win. Viriathus knew he couldn't win, and he tried to get peace. And the Romans it was hard to get that peace. And again, the Romans, very treacherous in that war. As opposed to this, completely different. The Romans constantly trying to give you peace and trying to end the hostilities between you. It's very funny to contrast between the Lusitanian War and the Roman diplomacy and the Achaean War. It is very funny. But again, constantly giving you peace, giving you every out you can take, and you just won't take it. So I think you have to look at Critulus and Dias as very terrible leaders, especially when you contrast them with a guy who was in a way harder position in Viriathus, who did almost everything he could right. If you watch my video, I put Viriathus in the just category, and I stand by that. I think he was a very just man who tried the best he could for his people, and unfortunately for him, he was assassinated, which is another big knock on Critulus and Dias because they lose their battles. Viriathus won most of the battles he had with Rome, so the only guy who had any real success against Lusitanians was Lucius Mummius, and he went and destroyed, and he got a little busy beating these guys in Corinth. So yeah, I mean, I just think a major point I really wanted to bring up here is comparing Viriathus to Critulus and Dias to show their kind of incompetence. This is, again, wars against literally the same Roman general and at the same time, and against a Rome that was giving them every benefit of the doubt, especially when you look at how Rome treated Lusitanians. With all that being said, though, we're going to get on to the tier list. All right, it's time to get on to the tier list. This is a tough one. What led to this war, which was the Achaean League trying to expand its territory, and Rome protecting the interest of the Spartans and the previously conquered, try and keep the peace as best they could. I believe the actions of Rome, even including the generals, was just. And I believe the actions of the Achaean League, specifically declaring war against Sparta, was unjust. I think you could get very nuanced here with this, and especially breaking down all of the previous wars. Something I did neglect to mention, I should have mentioned, is that Metellus, the reason that so many of the city states were afraid once they heard he was dispatched to fight was because he was responsible for winning the final Macedonian War. So, there was a healthy fear of him already. And then, you got Mummius coming as well. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like I should have mentioned that, like, the Greek people had a reason to revere Metellus and be afraid of him. Um, anyway, so I can't get behind the Achaean League. You're, even if we take out wanting territory of an enemy that you helped conquer, you specifically declared war against a former ally in Sparta. They declared war against the Lacedaemonians, who were still a Roman ally, as were they were, severing this pact that the three of them had. So that alone is unjust. I'm afraid I cannot get behind it. Lucius Mummius, the sources seem to like Lucius Mummius. They seem to say he was a very noble guy. He acted that way in the Lusitanian War, so I kind of have no reason to believe that he wasn't. However, he did impose all these fines and harsh leadership and kind of take away authority in Greece following this event. But that was rescinded by Rome, and it sort of feels like that was a not fake, but just a measurement to kind of keep them in check and show what they could do, and then they rescinded it. And I think maybe he had orders to do that. We don't know the full story. I'm going to put Lucius Mummius in just, and I'm going to put Metellus also in just. If I had to really pick who was more just, it's tough. I I I want to put Metellus because he constantly asked for peace, but being that that was in the interest of just having him solely wrap up this war, I but is it bad? I mean, okay, I'm gonna get the glory for wrapping up the war, but the way I'm gonna wrap it up is gonna cause the least amount of death and bloodshed. I'm gonna slightly put Metellus over Mummius, but I don't know, ever so slightly, but they're really tied. That's kind of how I feel. And Critolus, I absolutely am putting him in unjust. Most of the blame is on this guy. I'm not gonna put him in the Mandate of Hell because while I think it's incredibly short-sighted, and I love that quote about this just being madness, not ill luck. I love that, and I think it perfectly encapsulates the situation. But I don't think Critolus was evil. You know, I just think he perhaps wasn't that smart, and that's But his actions were still unjust. Obviously, drumming up war, having the people attack the delegates, and most importantly, declaring the war against Sparta and marching these people to their death, very unjust. Dias, I want to put in watch it play it in the sense of like I really want to give him an out. I want to be like, oh, it's all right. But this guy basically forced slaves to fight to the death for him on the grounds that oh yeah, you'll get free if you live, which was not going to happen. And I mean, yeah, the guy killed his wife. And you could say, oh, he did it. What? I mean, the guy killed his wife and killed himself and left the people. Could have kind of surrendered the city to try and, mitigate this, but he just flees. Yeah, nah. That was gonna be like, nah, fuck this guy, man. You know what? Like, yeah. And you know what? You have to, like, clearly this is a guy who was on Critus's team. He's not like he tried to stop him. He was his predecessor, probably had influence over it as well. Both these guys, just terrible dudes, brought a lot of pain and suffering to a lot of people that did not need to happen. Um, and were given both multiple outs to stop it. So, yeah, it's tough. When you look at this in the macro, it kind of just seems like Rome is this big bully marching through, and that's kind of how it plays out. It is the Achaeans' fault at the end of the day. Where I really have to put these guys in unjust is when you compare this to the Lusitanians. once you see that comparison of how the Romans treated Viriathus and how they treated these guys and all the peace offerings, yeah, I just kind of have to put these guys. I just have to put these guys in unjust, and that is the Achaean War, guys. That is my tier list of morality. I'm gonna put Rome in the favorable position, which I think maybe if you take a step back and look at the Roman expansion, you might disagree with, but just for the moment, let's not pretend that the Achaean League were not allied with them. They were. They supported Rome and then attacked the other ally that they had in the Spartans. So yeah, I can't. That's unjust. It's wrong. If you wanted to, you could say because of Roman expansion, you put them down in this war. Fair enough, but I'm not going to, for the simple fact that the Achaeans fought with them. So I'm not going to punish the Romans in a war for something that they were helped in, and that the Achaeans agreed with. So that's that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video on the Achaean League. I hope you guys learned something. I'll see you guys in the next video. I don't know if we're going to cover the Macedonian Wars. I don't know if I'm going to keep moving forward. I don't know if I'm going to go back and do the Numantine War. I don't know. I don't know what I want to do yet. I kind of want to do all the. I know for sure I want to talk about Sulla. Either way, I don't know. I don't know what's going to be next, guys. It's going to hit me like divine providence, like a light beam hitting Constantine in his dream. Something will come to me. All right. Thank you for watching.